Hey guys, so I'm putting together a project that I tore apart 2 years ago for a guy and never got back to it. Moved, probably lost some parts, so had to get a few new ones. This is a Stihl MS180 and it is in pieces. So if you want to know how to disassemble, this is not the video for you. We will do some reassembly. He complained about erratic idle, and these the 018, 021, 25, and then MS 250, 180, etc. All with these self-enclosed motors are pretty notorious for seals leaking around the crank where it bolts together. I believe it probably is leaking on the crank side of the seal. So we're going to put new bearings because they're cheap and new seals in this as long as we got it apart. We'll do them both. I already have, see on here. We're going to get right started. I've already put Permatex number 2, non-hardening gasket maker, gasket sealer. On both halves, well, mostly one, but up here, just to make sure the outside race of the seals. So we're going to get going here. Tried to clean everything up already to save a little bit of time. But so to go ahead and remove these, what I'm going to do is probably not what a Stihl tech would do, but I have limited bearing pullers and tools. So if you don't have a tiny little puller, this works pretty good. You go ahead and put the end back on, the fastener back on the flywheel side here. And we're going to take and put it right in the vise and tighten it down. Not overly tight. It can move a little bit. But what you're going to want to do, you'll be able to see it a little better on this side, is get to where you have this bearing right here. And you can see that little, the cutout from the flywheel weight. I'm going to take just a chisel, or a punch, sorry. Keep it tight on that so you know when you hold it, you're on the bearing race completely. And it will take a little bit of pressure, a little bit of force to get that to start moving. Use a small hammer. This is my old horseshoeing hammer. It seems to work pretty good. You get too big of a hammer and I tend to get too carried away. But we're going to go ahead and start driving this. And if you look, they fit fairly tight to that flywheel casing. Now see how much I've moved already on this bearing. You see how tight, there's not a lot of clearance in there. You see it better there. But just make sure that you look and make sure what you want to move is moving and you're not tearing stuff apart that you don't want to tear apart. Get on there as best we can again. I can feel it moving now down my hand. And there's one. Let's see that bearing over there. Adjust this one more time here. How about that? Alright, so now this has a, I'll put this back on just for now. This has a C-clip. This side has a C-clip on it, which usually in the past it's been, they're not too hard. So if you just kind of hold it, push it with a screwdriver like that. Make sure your hand's on it because it will go flying. And that's that part. Now this side, we don't have a spot for a fastener. We're going to go ahead and keep it off of these threads and just put it on this shaft race for the, we're not going to over tighten it and put a bunch of crimp marks in it, just enough to hold it. And it is not the proper way, but if you take your time and watch what you're doing, you can do it without really messing anything up. And for the amount of money what it costs to get the right bearing puller, this saw is not worth it. So we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing. Couple good wraps, and I feel the, I felt this moving down on me here. I tried to kind of hold around the flywheel and hold up on it as I struck it, as to not drive those threads down into the vise. And that's it. So as long as you be fairly careful, and we didn't damage that. You can use a little machinist cloth or emery cloth to shine that up a little bit if you make a burr mark. So the installation is actually going to be a little easier. I moved my vise over to here where I have better light, so it's kind of a clunky deal not being mounted down. But I do have, just by chance, a bearing driver, which is a little nicer, because if you mess up the old bearing somehow taking it off, it's the old bearing. You mess up the new one and you got to buy another new one. So I'm gonna do this and get myself a socket. Socket works the same if you get the right size, but you can see how that slip. You have to get the right size. This here, you want to be on the inside race, not the outside race. And that slides right down on there nice. Now I'm going to put that on the top, and I'm going to grab a little bigger hammer this time. Give me a little more force. And try and keep that so I don't block the whole view. Hopefully I can edit this out if I have time. So, well, as with everything, everything's movable. Just go kind of easy, and you can turn and watch. This nut has a nice castle edge on it, so I know I can't drive that down in there, but you hear the difference when it's seated. It starts driving all the way into the bench. That way you know it's seated properly. Now, put our seal on. Now, we're taking, I'm going to throw this other bearing on here so I can push that. Oops. So now when I drive this side, which take the fastener off, I know that I'm only driving all the force and anything that's going to happen is going to happen to this old bearing, and unless you get really carried away. Slide it on as far as it goes by hand. Our handy dandy driver, slightly modified. And listen again as you hear and watch it. Get my hand out of the way. It's bouncing too. I didn't know that. Here. This will show it a little better. Hear that one was different. It's set, and that's all in the wrist. Don't get too happy driving that. Put the seal on this side. In fact, I'm going to take that seal off. I'm going to take this bearing off. I'm going to pull this seal back off. And what I like to do, I doubt it's of necessity, but I always, little PB blaster, get it inside that bearing. Work it around there, drop it, put a good dent in the piston, skirt. No, we're good. Wipe that off of there so the seal's on that Permatex as best as it can, and it gives you a little bit of a lube surface to slide the seal on. And then what it also does, so again we have Permatex in there, Permatex all the way over this, where we have the outside race of our seal not in on the bearings. No need for that. Permatex is number 2 is really nice, non-hardening, so you don't have to waste a bunch of time. There's the little locator pins, one here and one here on your piston. That's where your rings come together, so make sure before you stick it back in there you kind of got them in the right spot. It's hard to hold everyone, but if you can get around there you can kind of push that in there. Now we want the locator pins. Where are we at here? Make sure we get this on right. So the saw sits like that. The engine sits with the spark plug back towards you and the intake back towards you. So we turn that around, so this side should be the clutch side and this side should be the flywheel side. So even though I was a little confused there, I have the parts around me to kind of straighten that up. Now you see it's not, we're just going to kind of wiggle these around until those rings find their groove. And there it is. And you know that it's in there mostly properly from, there's no binding up and down. Now, get it in there right eventually. A little lip was holding us up here on this bearing. Take the back of the screwdriver, and this seals in too far. Same way with this one. Nice and soft rubber hand. I imagine they might tell you to kind of put it together first without putting the seals on, but either way. So this one, let's see if there's, it's been 2 years, so might take a second to figure this out. That goes there. Doesn't appear to be any differentiation between which side is which. This little bugger here, let's see if there's anything in the case. Yeah, I don't think we want it that way because this is going to catch over on that oiler tube. So we'll flip that around. Let's check to make sure it fits in there. That's another nice thing about that Permatex number 2. So you can mess around and think around and okay. There. See how tight that was on this side? This piece would have hung up. Or this one right here. Unless there's something on the back of the that's going to hit. Aha. Let's take that out. Maybe this is more important. Is the flywheel going to hit on that? Yep. Guarantee this is the wrong way. Trial and error. And Permatex just waiting for its turn to be tightened down. And these right screws, they are open, so there's no way that we can crack that by over tightening. Well, I'm sure you could, but by tightening them into bottoming out in a hole. Always torque them just a little bit. Some junk in that hole. Make sure that you seat them all before you torque them down. Risk busting that cover.